The government came to power promising to cut energy bills at the same time as cutting carbon emissions. But today, Britain has among the highest energy prices in the world.
The fundamental problem is, we cannot store electricity in very large volumes.
And a growing debate about climate policies driving up prices.
The cost of it is completely ludicrous.
So as consumers learn what will happen to prices this winter, how can we get bills down?
I think I'm paying about half the bills I used to pay.
And is there any quick fix for Britain's energy crisis?
Energy bills, war, and the check that may be coming. Will Rachel Reeves step in? There is a question hanging over Westminster right now like a storm cloud that refuses to move. A conflict in the Middle East, oil prices climbing, and British families standing at the edge of what could become another brutal squeeze on their energy bills. The question is not whether this government is watching. They are. The real question is, what are they prepared to do about it? Welcome to British Energy, the channel that cuts through the political noise and gets to what actually matters for your money, your home, and the future of this country. If you are new here, please take a moment and subscribe. Hit that bell. This is the kind of content that keeps you ahead of the conversation, and we are just getting started. Now, let us get into it. When missiles began falling in Iran a fortnight ago, most people in this country were watching the news with a kind of grim familiarity. Another conflict, another unstable region, another ripple moving across global markets. But inside the Treasury, the reaction was rather more urgent than grim familiarity. Chancellor Rachel Reeves reportedly put aside her plans for the spring statement entirely and spent that weekend doing something altogether more consequential. She started wargaming what a sustained conflict in the oil-rich Middle East could mean for the British economy, and specifically, what it could mean for the energy bills of ordinary working people. She did not stop there. Reeves has since asked her most senior official to establish what is being called an Iran Response Board, a unit staffed by ministers, advisors, and senior Treasury civil servants. Its singular purpose is to work out how the government can protect the economy and families from the worst possible consequences of spiraling oil prices. That is not the behavior of a government that is merely watching from the sidelines. That is a government bracing itself. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting and genuinely complicated. Government sources, speaking with the kind of barely restrained urgency that tells you a great deal, have described the potential blowback from the Iran conflict as insanely profound and simply huge. Those are not the words of people who think this will pass quietly. And Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer this week stood in the Commons and made his position plain. No matter the headwinds, supporting working people with the cost of living is always top of my mind. Fine words, but this is politics. Words are cheap. What matters is the check and whether it gets written. Here is the uncomfortable historical truth that sits underneath all of this. This country is still paying for the last time government wrote that check. The energy price guarantee under Liz Truss, remember her, cost the British taxpayer in the region of £44 billion. Before that, furlough cost somewhere in the region of £70 billion, though economists argue that net cost was around £25 billion because it preserved the economic fabric of the country. The point is, the bills were enormous. The debt remains. And yet, when you talk to the people who made those decisions, what strikes you is not regret. It is the sense that they had absolutely no alternative. One former senior official who worked closely with Rishi Sunak during the pandemic described the alternative in stark terms. Northwards of 10 million people losing their jobs within 4 weeks, while the government was simultaneously telling them to stay at home. There was no version of events in which you could call that a free market problem and walk away. And in 2022, when Liz Truss arrived in Downing Street still muttering about no handouts, officials were already showing her modeling of households earning £50,000 to £60,000 a year tipping into fuel poverty. The numbers were so alarming, and the potential for social breakdown so real. Pubs closing, small businesses folding, families unable to heat their homes through winter, that action became inevitable.
You had to do it big or not do it, one source recalled. The half measure was never going to work. Stay with us, because what comes next is where the current situation becomes truly fascinating and honestly rather important for your understanding of where this government might go. This time, it is different, or at least the aspiration is that it should be different. Sources close to the discussions have confirmed that while there is broad acceptance that intervention may once again become necessary, there is an acute awareness of the chaos and cost of the 2022 bailout. That intervention was rushed, blunt, and universal. The Treasury paid to cap the bills of the wealthiest households in the country alongside the poorest. As one source put it with admirable directness, the Treasury paid for the richest man in the country and the poorest man in the country. That is not a model anyone wants to repeat. So this time, the government is exploring whether it can target support more precisely, identifying those who would genuinely suffer most from a spike in energy costs and directing help specifically to them. It sounds sensible in principle. In practice, as one former Downing Street official acknowledged, it is far from straightforward. There is no clean correlation between income and energy bills. An elderly person living alone in a large, poorly insulated Victorian house on a tiny fixed income might face enormous bills. A family of 5 with a decent combined salary might live in a new-build flat that barely costs anything to heat. The data is messy. The targeting is hard. The government is also looking at the position of small and medium-sized businesses, those enterprises that cannot absorb sustained energy price increases the way large corporations can. This may not mean direct cash transfers. It could involve adjustments to policy that help smaller firms access better energy contracts or more competitive pricing. There is also ongoing pressure from some quarters to strip certain non-energy costs off bills, levies that currently fund grid upgrades, for instance. But here's the tension. Take money away from grid investment now, and you risk paying far more for energy in the long run. These are not easy trade-offs. And before you assume a crisis is already upon us, one government source offered a note of caution, suggesting there could be a scenario in which the price cap rises by only a modest amount. Ofgem will not make a decision on the next cap until the end of May, and somewhat ironically, energy bills for many households are actually due to fall for at least 3 months, courtesy of a recent drop in the price cap. So the full picture is not yet clear. But that does not mean complacency is appropriate. The government knows this. And crucially, if you are watching this channel, which by the way, we would very much like you to subscribe to if you have not already, because content like this takes genuine time and resource to put together, and your support makes it possible, you should know that the political logic here is almost inescapable. One government source summed it up with characteristic Westminster frankness. If Truss and Kwarteng did it, then Starmer and Reeves will feel they need to as well. A Labour government that campaigns on protecting working people, that has made cost of living the centerpiece of its domestic agenda, cannot stand by while household energy bills climb to levels that cause genuine hardship. The politics simply will not allow it. As the same source put it, it is inconceivable to imagine a Labour government not helping people out. The question of how they would fund it, however, is already causing headaches. One government insider framed the options with a kind of weary pragmatism. Does the Treasury dip into reserves? Does the Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband, find a way to extract the cost from the energy companies themselves? Or does the government go, in that memorable phrase, round everyone with a begging bowl? None of those options is clean. None of them is without consequence. And here is the deeper, more uncomfortable question that very few in Westminster want to have out loud. Each time the government steps in to protect people from an economic emergency, pandemic, energy crisis, and now potentially conflict-driven oil shock, it resets the public expectation of what the state will do. One of those involved in the furlough discussions put it plainly. The biggest thing was realizing the expectation of the state had been reset. If people now expect the government to stand behind them in every crisis, and there is evidence they do, then the country needs an honest conversation about what that means, about how it gets paid for, about what gets cut or taxed or deferred to fund the next emergency response. A former Downing Street official offered perhaps the most sobering assessment of all. Energy has become more expensive, but is it really up to the government to be liable for your bills? A ratchet only moves in one direction. That is the question that nobody in power is yet ready to answer, but someone eventually will have to. This story is far from over. The Iran Response Board is still meeting. Ofgem has not yet set the next cap, and the spring statement that Rachel Reeves had planned is now a document written in a world that no longer quite exists. We will be watching every development, the announcements, the briefings, the numbers, and bringing it to you here, clearly and without spin. If this is the kind of rigorous, grounded British political coverage that you want more of, then please subscribe to British Energy. Take a breath, stay informed, and come back, because the next chapter of this story is going to matter enormously to every household in this country. We will be here when it happens.